At this point, hopefully you understand some of the more basic concepts around agents and function calling. So what we're going to do here is we're going to dive into our first instance of actually using a function. And what we're going to be doing in this lesson is we're going to be using a very simple get weather function. Okay, so you can see the entire schema here is defined here. So at this point, based off what we did in the last lesson, okay, you should be able to kind of identify the different pieces of this schema, right? What is the blueprint of this tool? So this is the format, again, that the OpenAI API expects, which again is fairly consistent across APIs. So if you're somebody who's, maybe you're wanting to get a little bit adventurous here and you want to use the Anthropic API for function calling, maybe you want to use Claude 3.5 Sonnet or something, go ahead and do that. All of the principles are going to be fairly similar here. Just maybe some slight things might be moved around. But again, all of the core concepts hold, right? So we have a function, a type of function here. And then inside of the function, we have a name. Okay, so our function name is getWeather. This is a good name because we don't have to get too cute here. That's one of the things I recommend, by the way. Don't get too cute with the names. You want to avoid things like shortening names, right? So like some programmers get really weird. Well, they'll do something like get like weather. This is probably not a practical example, but they'll try and make their functions like really short or something. You don't want to be too short. You want to be very verbose. You want to make it so that, just a good litmus test is like, if you had somebody sitting next to you and you gave them whatever your query is, they should be able to look at the list of functions that they have available, almost as if they're like a bunch of different sticky notes, and they should basically be able to pick which one of those sticky notes is appropriate based on your query. Okay, so that's kind of the barometer that you want to use to measure whether or not something, a function, has a good name and a good description. Okay, so get weather is a great name, description, get the weather for our location. Okay, that's very clear. There are some ways we could make this a little bit more robust, however. For example, you'll note down here with the only parameter that we have for this function, which is location, okay, and you can see that that is a required parameter. You'll see in here we describe it's a type of string, and it needs to be the city and the state. Okay, so the function, when the LLM makes the function call, it should output something that looks like this. Right, if we were to do Detroit, for example, it would be Detroit and then comma MI for Michigan, right? So the idea is this is the format that we expect the location parameter to come back as. And we could also add that, just to be a little bit clearer here, you could almost add that up here and say, example, we could even use the Detroit example, right? So in this case, we're almost adding two examples so that the model has a little bit of extra kind of instructions like, hey, we really want to emphasize like this is the format here. So that's just like one of those minor ways that you can actually improve your function. But you'll see that even if we get rid of this, which is what we'll do as we use the weather function here, this is going to suffice, right? With simple functions like this, simplicity is fine. But again, as you get more creative and you're going to get to the point where you're building agents that have a lot of really complex tools, and your function schemas are going to be kind of, when you're juggling like 3 or 4 different variables and they're handling, more complex tasks, you're just going to need to get a little bit more clear and direct and maybe add some examples in that description, which we covered a lot of this in the last video, so I don't want to kind of sit here for too long. But I do think that's just a really important point to emphasize. The model's ability to call these functions is largely going to be dependent on how well you build these out. Okay, so just keep that in mind. But let's actually go ahead and look at what we're doing in here. Okay, so this is going to look very familiar to some of the code that we had in the memory section, right? We're basically having a little bit of a command line style chat here so that we can chat back and forth with the AI here. Again, we're going to focus mostly on conceptual stuff in some of these early sections. We're not going to kind of write all of this from scratch. It's kind of a little bit of a waste of your time. So we're just going to kind of keep things simple and just highlight the concepts here. But we're going to have a little bit of a CLI here. And again, we're going to pass that single get weather tool into the chat completions API with GPT-4o mini. Okay, we'll get to model complexity in future videos, but GPT-4o mini is going to be fine for what we're doing here. And basically, we need to have a little bit of a chat with the AI in the command line. If the AI detects that, hey, the user wants to get the weather, it's going to go ahead and try and use that get weather function. And where it's going to pull data from is, you'll see we have this mock weather data array. Okay, this is kind of the data schema of each one of these objects here. And so in this array, we have what, 3, 4, 5, 6 different cities here, just with a few different examples here. So anytime you query the weather, what's going to happen is this particular function is going to try and find the city and the state. Okay, it's going to return that, and then we're basically going to perform a search on this mock weather data based on the location. So if I go down here, you'll see we're doing a dot find, which is just a method in JavaScript that allows us to find the piece of data in that array that matches that particular parameter. Okay, and again, that comes back from the model's response from our function call request. Okay, so let's actually go ahead and use this. We'll kind of demonstrate how this works and just kind of get you familiar with what's going on here. So if we go ahead and copy the relative path here, we should have TSX perfectly installed as we did earlier in the course. We'll go ahead and run this. You'll see we have a little bit of input. So if I say hi, obviously the AI is not going to call the function, right? It's just going to say hello, very generic. If we do something like get me the weather in Miami, which is one of the functions, one of the pieces, one of the cities rather, that we have available here in this array, you'll see, if we go to Miami right here, you'll see what the model did was it saw that it had access to a get weather function, and the model deemed that it was a good time to invoke that function. Basically, it went, okay, based on this user's request, again, this is getting fed into the model at the API level. This obviously has to do with the weather, and it looks like the user wants to get weather, and I have access to a tool, right? I have access to a function that has the ability to call get weather. So the model called that function. It responded with Miami, Florida, okay, Miami FL, which again, the reason we got this particular response is because that's what we defined as one of the parameters in the function, right? So that's pretty straightforward there. You'll see if we go down here to args, okay, this is kind of where we parse the arguments of the function. This is just a fancy way for saying we're extracting the parameters from that function call. In this case, we only have that single parameter of location. You'll see if we go to args.location, okay, you'll see we're logging, getting the weather for, okay, that's where this log comes. So args.location is Miami, Florida, and then it's performing that dot find method on our weather data. It's pulling this data in here, okay, so it gets that entire object here, and what it's doing is it's basically just turning that into a string. It's returning that as a message to the AI, right? If you're familiar with the OpenAI API, and you've kind of seen this already from when we were working with the memory stuff, right? You have to pass the tool result, and then you have to pass the tool result as a message to the API, and then we'll basically get a final response from the API, and that's what you see right here. Okay, so the process is normal chat here, and then we're having a weather-related query. The model recognizes, okay, based on the user's query, I can get the function. This is the result of the model calling that function, gets the city for us. We use the data from the model's function call to actually run some actual code. Okay, so you remember back to the first video when I said the difference between function code and function calling, right? In this case, we're using the result from the function call to run the function code. Okay, and in this case, the function code here is this dot find on the weather data. And then the AI uses all of that to generate an answer, right? So the AI, right, if this were user facing, right, if we had like a nice UI, a nice web app or something like this, to take ChatGPT, for example, ChatGPT would render this as the answer, right? And it would probably hide this, or maybe it would have some like nice little weather widget just to kind of expose that the weather function was getting called or something. But that's kind of the gist of how it works, right? So if I started over here, we did a new chat, and I said get the weather in Phoenix, right? What's going to happen? The model is going to realize, okay, weather-related query, we can use get weather. Okay, we need the city and the state, right? So this is going to be Phoenix AZ. This is going to go ahead and search the list of cities we have to see if that exists. It does, right? In this case, it does because it's in our list here. And then it's going to retrieve this, add it to a string, pass it in as a message, and then give us a response, okay? So if we run this, that's exactly what's going to happen. Get weather runs, we get Phoenix AZ back, we get the data for that back, and then we get an AI-generated response. Then if I did something like, what's the weather what's the weather in Milan or something, what's going to happen here is you're going to see Milan's not one of the cities, right? We only have 6 US cities here. We don't have anything for Milan, Italy. So you're going to see the weather data is not found, and the AI is just going to say that, right? So we don't get like a nasty error message or anything. The nice thing is with function calling, if you don't get the data the kind of model's expecting, it's just going to give you a really human readable response like, hey, something went wrong, or hey, I don't have the weather data for that. And so you can see that's happening right here. And this becomes useful because there's going to be a lot of use cases when we get to kind of more advanced agents where you have a bunch of functions where maybe a certain function call doesn't go the way you would kind of typically expect. What you can do is you can build things like error handling in there and kind of handle those edge cases, handle those errors. And so we'll get to that later. But yeah, this is a really basic example here. You can see if you want to play around with this, you want to tweak this, you want to kind of maybe you want to change the mock data here and you want to change this, right? Like a cool thing you could do from the OpenAI example, right, is maybe you could do this get delivery date function. A good exercise here would be try and implement that and try and change the test data to kind of fit that use case and then give this a run, right? So you'll see the chat's in white, the function call here is blue. The data that you get back from the function call is going to be green, and then you're going to get the AI generated answer. So really nice little simple tool here just to demonstrate a very basic get weather function. Obviously, this is really simple, but if you kind of understand all the moving parts here, and hopefully this example kind of makes the 2 previous lessons click a little bit more and just kind of how that process works. So it's worth kind of studying the code, maybe trying to implement one of these yourself, because if you understand what's going on here, you can kind of do it from scratch and do it really fast. You're going to be really set because building tools is going to be something you do a ton when you're building AI agents. So understand this lesson and you are going to be set for everything that we're going to be doing in the future here.